welcome to the Alphacat user webinar for release 21.0.0.22. Just to ask if you can ask any questions, put the questions into the Q&A, and we can pick those up through the session. And if not, we'll pick them up at the end, complete them. Great. Also, just let you know this is being recorded, so we could provide a recording of that should you wish that. And I'm just going to hand over to Joe. I'm Joe Barrett, who's going to run us through this webinar. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Dave. So hi, everyone. If you've not met me before, my name is Joe Barrett. I'm a business analyst at Tax Systems and responsible for being involved in the design of Alphacat and making sure it's meeting our user needs and meeting the needs of FATCA and CRS reporting as well. So allowing you to do what you need to do. What I'm going to have a run through today is some of the key software enhancements that we've delivered in this latest release. We're also going to pick up on a few best practice sort of hints and tips as we go, following a bit of feedback on our release of the new platform last year. Then our customers, asked for us to sort of bring forward these best practices that you'd like to know about. I'll switch to Alphacat in a second and take us away from the slides, but what I'll be doing is sort of running through a process that you'd go through of setting up a report for the new year, getting your data in and getting the data out. So running through the process as you would normally approach it and simply picking up on the enhancements. So talking through those as we hit them at points in the process and picking up the best practices as well. As Dave says, we shall try and leave some time for questions as well at the end. If you do have questions, do drop them in the Q&A, and we can, of course, do our best to try and leave some time to pick those up and answer them for you on this webinar. Should we sort of run out of time, or if you have questions that you'd rather ask at a later date, the intention here is really just to give you guys a load of information to help you get started with the latest filing season. And then, of course, we have our support team available to help you should you require any assistance or want to discuss something in more detail after today's session. So enough of the slides for now. I shall switch across to Alphacat. Dave, before I get going, can I just check you can see Alphacat on my screen now? I can't hear you, but I saw a nod, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Thank you. Okay, so this is the latest edition of Alphacat. Looks indeed a lot like the release last year. Before I go into the process, actually, one key thing to sort of point out for my demo is that I'm going to just run through a UK FATCA example, as that touches on a number of points from the latest release and the enhancements we've included. But the general process, whether you're filing FATCA or CRS, and whether you're filing in the UK or other jurisdictions, is fundamentally the same. You might come across some subtle differences in between, but the process is largely the same. Important things to mention about this year's release, actually, we'd encourage you to install it as soon as you can. To know you're running the latest release, the release version is always down here in this bottom left-hand corner. Couple of good reasons to get it installed sooner rather than later. You'll only have the option to produce a report for 2020 reporting period data from this latest release. So you'll only see up to 2019 in earlier versions. Once you install this latest release, it will allow you to create reports for the 2020 filing season. Also important is that this version includes the latest schema for CRS reports. So for any of you who are filing CRS reports this year, ones which use the OECD schema, which is going to be the majority of jurisdictions with the exception of the UK, there is a new schema for your CRS reports. what this means for you guys is that there'll be a new set of electronic tags essentially applied to all of the data in your report. So in terms of process, you don't have to do anything new. In terms of data, there's very little that's changed from the schema last year. Most of this, if not all of it, is dealt with by us under the bonnet. So Alphacat will deal with it for you. The important thing is that when it outputs the report that you're going to submit, the XML file, it will have this version 2 schema of tags applied to it. And when you try and submit a report to any jurisdiction portal, they're going to check that you are using version 2. So that applies to reports for 2020 reporting data, and it applies to reports for any other earlier periods as well. So that came into force from the start of this year. We saw one customer sort of at the very start of the year before we got this release out, trying to file a 2019 period, I think it was. And the new schema, that was with version 1 of the schema, and that got bounced back by a jurisdiction portal. So they've since just had to put this latest release in place. That's got the schema there, didn't have to change any data, simply updated, produce a report again, and it's submitted. So it's important to get this implemented as soon as possible. Other things to have a look out for when thinking about this year and before you put data in is management groups within Alphacat. So management groups are a fantastic tool for creating containers for your for the reports that you're going to submit. It's a great way of organizing your data. One thing we get asked about is rolling forward data from one year to the next. And these queries often come up from users who've either used our old version of Alphacat, which is very similar to our other major product, Alphatax, or if the user has used Alphatax in the past, which is a corporation tax focused product, where you have more of a concept of values rolling forward from previous year into the current year. For FATCA and CRS, what we see generally happens in practice is that a lot of our customers will just import all the data fresh for a new period. So all of the data which is going to go into the report you're going to submit starts life in an Excel template and is simply all uploaded again each year. So it might be that you have a lot of the same reportable accounts, same individuals, same addresses, etc. for those individuals, but it's first captured in Excel and then imported. And so there's not really so much of information rolling forward in the system as such, because it comes in fresh every year. So what we recommend actually is that you set up a new management group for this new reporting year. So if you submitted a report for one management group last year, it's a good idea to sort of set up a new one for this new reporting year. And that's quite easily done through options, global, management groups, users, and you'll see there's a tab management groups here. There's quite a few I've set up earlier, but you can simply add a new management group into there. Key benefits of doing this is that it will keep your data sort of easier to manage and tidier, if you will. So it essentially gives you an empty container to import that data into. So it'll be easier for you to sort of manage and sort through it. If you wanted to, you can import data for the new year into an existing management group. But you'll see that you'll have your transactions for previous years mixed with the transactions for this year as well, the data you're reporting this year. So having new management groups helps keep that separate and easier to manage. Another key reason we sort of recommend this approach is just in case you should have to make a correction in later years. So with a management group, you're essentially keeping a snapshot of your data that made its way into the XML for an earlier period. So let's say you prepared a report for 2019, you've got that snapshot of data in there contained for 2019, and you create a new management group for 2020, you're then putting new data into there. if you do put New Year's data into that sort of group you use, management group you used for 2019 originally, then something like an address might update, and the address that you previously had for 2019 will be overwritten for 2020, so you get the correct address in the 2020 report. Now, let's say further down the line you had to correct a TIN, which was included in that 2019 report. When you go to make a correction in the software, you would correct that TIN. But what would also then go into that correction that you submit to the authorities is the most up-to-date address you've got in that management group. And that most up-to-date address is going to be the latest one you put in there, not necessarily what it was in 2019. So you may not want to change that. So it's another reason why we recommend just setting up new management groups for each reporting period. It's generally quite good practice. I jumped out of options a bit soon, but something else I wanted to sort of just highlight while I was in there. User preferences. So you may have seen these already, you may not have. But what we have in here, agreement types and tax authorities on a tab. Now, what this controls is the options that show up on the dashboard that you can launch from the home screen I've got in the background. Tax authorities is going to show all of the jurisdictions you're licensed for. In Alphacat, and agreement types will show all of the agreement types which could possibly apply. By default, it's going to show everything. You can simply untick any of these boxes if you know these reporting types aren't going to apply, or if you're not going to use one of your licensed jurisdictions for this year, you can untick that and save. What you also have is a similar control on countries and currencies. So this controls what the order in which you see things in any drop-down lists in Alphacat, and we'll see this in action later on. So by default, it lists all countries alphabetically, and all currencies as well, sort of alphabetized too. What you can do is prioritize. So if you know that you're working more commonly with particular countries or particular currencies, then you can untick those you're not working with and save that. And that will make a sort of change to just your installation of, your user account within your installation of Alphacat. And it will push to the top any jurisdictions that perhaps you more commonly, countries you more commonly work with. So if you wanted UK at the top of the lists, then prioritize UK, it will appear first. And then you'll still get all these other countries, they'll just be below your prioritized ones. So a good bit of practice there. So onto one of our enhancements for this year. A big enhancement that we've made is a change to introduce a new data gathering template. So we spoke about this a bit in our release notes, but there are many reasons why we've introduced this new template. It's more flexible, so you can put multiple RFIs into it if that applies to you and you do want to collect data and manage data for multiple RFIs within a management group. You'll find it's faster to import. It can also hold more data. So our previous sheet was restricted to 5,000 reportable accounts at a time, but there's no restriction as such on this template. There are just a few reasons that we've moved across to it. Hopefully you guys will see the benefit of it as well. This new data template, you find it in much the same way you found the data template last year. We go into the data screen. We go into tools, and down here amongst data import, you'll see that this is updated slightly. So what we have now here is the option to create a new spreadsheet template. And what you get in this drop-down list here is a list of jurisdiction-specific templates for all of the jurisdictions that you're licensed to use. So you can see that not only that, you get agreement-specific templates as well. So ones which are designed to collect data CRS, ones which are designed to collect data FATCA. Behind these, if you select one of these specific ones, it will change the column headings ever so slightly to just have those which are relevant to CRS or those which are relevant for FATCA. And it will do the same with the drop-down lists as well that you get within the template, which you'll see shortly. It will tailor those so they're specific to CRS or FACTA or specific to something that the jurisdiction requires. If you don't want to use one that is very specific, there is an all template at the top, which just caters for all scenarios. So you can use that one and put any country, any agreement, any jurisdiction, use it for any jurisdiction and any agreement type that you want to. But simply select the template that you want from the list, click on create, and that will generate it into Excel. We'll go into the template in a second. To help, or one of the first things we've done to help is we've provided some examples. So we've got 3 example templates down here, one that has CRS data in, one that has FATCA data in, and one that uses the United Kingdom CRS and FATCA template, as many of our customers are filing reports in the UK to HMRC. So if I open up that example, let's just show you what it looks like. So just dragging it onto the screen now. I'm just going to spend some time just briefly talking you through how the data in this new sheet is laid out, and then I'll point you towards what we've provided to help you with using this new template. So one of the perhaps most important things to start off with, there is a start tab. So this includes some basic guidance, and it also includes a bit of explanation, a brief explanation of what data goes onto each of these tabs, which I'll spend a bit of time talking through now, but that's there as a reminder for you. The idea with this template is that you work from left to right through the tabs. The first tab, the lookups table, the lookups tab, you don't need to do any work on that. That's simply presenting you drop-down lists of information which are going to appear later on in the template. On the entities page, this is where you'll find that you provide detail of all individuals. So we've got 3 individuals here, and all organizations or sort of entities that you're reporting rather than individuals. So it's either you put in first name and last name, or you'll put a legal name in. The rest of the data is similar across both of those. So you'll see we then go on to give information on the address. And further to the right, we identify a tax ID and which jurisdiction it was issued by. A change on this template is that we also put the reporting FI details on here now. So because the reporting FI details are exactly the same, so you're putting in names, address, tax IDs, then it's just been incorporated into this same sheet. The difference is that you just need to recognize in this column here, which is a reporting FI. Just for the row that contains the reporting FI, just say, yes, this is a reporting FI. As I mentioned, you can put many reporting FIs in here if you want to. So if it's a case that you've got multiple, just recognize all of those different reporting FIs. To explain some of the colors, the blues on here referring to where it's going to utilize one of those lookup tables. So we've got the countries in here, for example. The orange color right towards the start is recognizing a free text field, but where that is going to turn into data, which you look up on later tabs in the sheet. So an entity code here is a code that you can simply give to each individual. It's not something that's going to go into the final XML report that you submit, but it's simply a unique ID of your own choosing to recognize any individuals. So that could be, you can just put sort of a count of 1 to however many. If you want to use something more specific, you can put something more specific into there. The accounts tab is quite simply a list of the account numbers. If you use numbers and not names, one or the other, it's simply the account numbers that are going to go into the report, and then there's a name given to that. So again, that's your own unique ID. You can easily just here utilize the account number. There's nothing to stop you from having that exact same detail. and that's what we've done here. Account holders then links those first two tabs together. So you list out your account names. You then list out all of the holders. So if you've got multiple holders for an account, you'll have the account name twice and then recognize the two holders for that account. Two or more, you can put as many as you want into one account on here. You then recognize the type of holder. So are they an individual? Are they an organization? Are they a passive NFE with controlling persons? It's just creating that link to say who is the holder of each account. Transactions tab. This is where you detail out the transactions per account. So you can see here for an account, I've got the balance detail. I've then got the interest. This is also where you put dividends, etc., or any of the type of payments that you declare for FACRA or CRS purposes. You recognize the reporting date. So for this case, I'm looking at a 2020 period end. So we've got December 2020 in there, the amount and the currency. So it's simply a case of putting in the data, the transactions that you need to report per account by going down one transaction per row here. Connections tab. This is where you recognize connections. So there's two key connections. There's going to be controlling persons. There's one. So you recognize which entity they are controlling person of. And then which individual from that front page, using the ID you've given them, you connect the controllers to the entity that they control. This is also where you would put sponsors in place as well. So you'd recognize the RFI and then the sponsor and link the two together to say this is a sponsor of this RFI. Simply creates that connection. Relationships. This ends up reporting individuals' tax interests. So which countries are they considered tax resident in and for what purpose? So that's mainly going to be FACA for the US and CRS for other jurisdictions. It's also used for the reporting FIs as well. So saying which jurisdiction are they reporting to? So whether that's one or whether it's many jurisdictions that they're reporting to. I think in most cases it's going to be one jurisdiction that you're reporting to. And what are they reporting for? Are they reporting for CRS or FACA purposes? Controls is simply software focused. So we do have the ability in Alphacat for you to have specific users given permission to approve as you go through. To be perfectly honest, I don't think there's too many of you out there, very few who will end up using this, and it's perfectly acceptable to leave this tab blank. We can explore that, as I say, contact support, and we can explain that further if you'd like to explore that more. And then finally, on the management group settings, there's a section within Alphacat, if I just go back into it, where you put in certain details that relate to your management group. So those of you who filed in the UK last year will know this is a place where you would go to put in your HMRC user ID, for example. There's a few other jurisdictions where we have similar data. But this tab, the management group settings, gives you the opportunity to put that ID into this spreadsheet, and that will be imported into Alphacat. We know that's something that a lot of you asked for, having used the new platform last year. So hopefully you'll be pleased to see that one. Things to look out for in this sheet. So that's a quick run through. A couple of other hints as I go through this. On the entities page, you might have seen on here, where previously in our old sheet, you would work across if you had an individual with multiple residencies and tax IDs that you needed to report. In this case, you're working down the sheet. So we can see Michael here with a reference of controlling person 3. If I scroll to the right, he's got 2 tax IDs for 2 different jurisdictions. He's also got 2 tax interests on the relationships tab. But rather than working across, you're simply working down. And you'll note that we haven't repeated any of the information about his address on here. We've got that once, we only need it once. We just need to know sort of which account to link that tax ID to. So you can put as many different residencies as you need to for the accounts you're reporting in there. You're no longer restricted by what we had in our previous sheet. Transactions tab, one thing we've seen a bit from people using this in practice is when you list in the received from column, this is the RFI that you put the name of in here. Rather, we've seen people putting the individuals who hold the accounts, but the detail we're looking for here is to link the accounts to the RFI that they belong to. So for a lot of you, if you're just reporting for one RFI, that's quite a simple job to just copy and paste that all the way down. If you're using this sheet for multiple RFIs, then recognize which account which RFI each account belongs to. Also, as I sort of mentioned earlier on, this sheet you can put as many reportable accounts as you want in here. So I won't scroll all the way to the bottom, it's a long way. We previously had a cap of 5,000 reportable accounts. In this one, you can put in as many as you want. We know that Alphacat can handle tens of thousands. However, one thing that we do recommend is to be conscious of the report that's going to come out at the end of this process. So one thing we're aware of is that tax authority portals have a cap on how big a file you can submit to them. So what we tend to recommend is try and keep your data to sets of 10K or 10,000 reportable accounts or less. This translates to roughly a 15 megabyte file, which is within the limits of most, if not all, jurisdictions. You can put more than that into Alphacat, but just be conscious that it's going to grow the megabyte size of the XML which comes out the other end, and that might bounce back on a jurisdiction portal if they can't handle files of a very big size.
Joe, we've just had one question on the Q&A. I don't know if you want to pick it up at the moment from regarding the Alphacat tool can it handle the data uploaded using the previous template, or do we need to use this updated template?
Yeah, I'll quickly answer that one now. Yes, for this year, you can use the previous year's template. So we are still supporting that for this year. One thing to be aware of, though, is that we've upgraded Alphacat to 64-bit for this year. And there was a driver that needed to be installed last year to support our previous template. That will need upgrading to 64-bit. So there is more in our release notes about that technical detail. We'll happily follow up on that. But to answer the question David asks, yes, you can use the previous template for this year.
Thank you.
Just moving on to helping you with using this new template, then some of the features which we've introduced to help you transition across to this. As I mentioned, we've got some guidance around this. So not only is there guidance on the front sheet, we've also prepared a whole separate manual of guidance. So there's much more detail in there if you want to explore that. For linking two things together, if you are preparing data for the first time for an entity this year, but you do have the XML from last year, we've introduced a feature which will generate a populated copy of that spreadsheet from an XML file. So we've implemented this for CRS version 1.0 to help transition into that new schema and into the new spreadsheet as well. So if you do have a file that was in CRS version 1 schema last year, you can browse to that, and the software will reverse engineer that for you and populate it to one of the sheets that we've been looking at. For many of you, this is going to be, say, your second year of using the system and importing data. And perhaps one of the most useful things that you'll find is that any data that you imported previously for a group is going to be, or was converted in the background into this new format. So the way you would find that is go into the management group you previously used, click on data. You should of course see all the data you imported last year. If you then go to tools and view logs, you'll see all of the data that you previously imported, whether that was just one import or many, as I seem to have with this demo group. If you view that log, you'll see that there's a source at the top. And if you click on that, then what you'll find is that that will have the data you imported last year using our previous template already formatted into this new format. So it will populate all of the tabs for you with that data. So that can be incredibly useful. You could theoretically import this template again for this year. So if very little data has changed, you can just open up the copy of the template that was populated last year. You'll want to put new transactions in, of course. So you would just go across to the transactions tab, put in the latest date, latest amount, and then you can import from that template. The one thing it's missing is just our guidance at the very start. So if you do want to put it into a fresh template, if you're sending it out, then the format is the same. So you can take a fresh empty template, copy and paste the data from the copy you obtained from the log, and then that can be ready to send out to someone else to review or to populate the new transaction data into there. So once that data's in the template, it can be then imported into the system. So that's a real shortcut to get you from the old template into the new. Another reason that we've moved across to this new template or another thing we've done with this new template is we've introduced better validation by taking it out of Excel, so we're not limited by Excel, and creating a separate tool for this. So you'll now see amongst your Alphacat installation that you have a sort of side application called the Alphacat spreadsheet checker. So if I just open that up, and I'm just going to locate a demo file I created earlier. So one of the reasons we've done this is that we're providing much more comprehensive validation in this spreadsheet checker now. So when you've got a completed spreadsheet, as it sort of suggests, you just drag and drop that into there, and it will do a similar level of validation to what you see in the software itself. So much thorough rule checking. How this presents itself back, if there are any errors in the sheet, it will provide those towards the top. It will then highlight any warnings within there, and then it will show you how it's interpreting the data that you've got, the data that it can interpret. It's showing you what it sees in there. So reporting FIs, I've got 1 in there. Here are the individuals I've got, count of 12. It's seeing 4 organizations, 13 account holders, and this many payments and balances in the sheet itself. So it's not, don't panic when you first see a long list of things in there. It's not necessarily all errors. It's reporting the good stuff that it's found. It's important as well. One thing I was supposed to point out from this, errors can cascade in here. So errors may not be as bad as you initially think they are. So for example, if you have one link which isn't quite right, then it may fail to create a connection when it's running through its checks, or say multiple transactions just seem to be orphaned and not relating to anyone. Simply fixing the first thing on the list can actually reduce the errors much more significantly. So don't be put off by the first run through you get if you do see a long list of errors. That could just be something cascading. Let's start getting some data in. So delving back into Alphacat, what I'm going to do is just switch across to a clean management group that I set up earlier. And to do that, to bring up this screen, again, another good hint, from this page, if you use one of our keyboard shortcuts, Control-Alt-F, then this will allow you to switch between management groups much more easily. So you get a list there, you can switch between agreements, and you can switch between periods quite quickly. So I tend to use that a lot in practice, just to do quick switching rather than going to the dashboard. Not as visually pleasing, but it is a quick way of getting things switching between different management groups and different agreements, etc. That was Control-Alt-F that I used. That's listed in our detailed user guide together with some other keyboard shortcuts, which are there. If I start to look at getting some data in, one thing that you might have noticed if you're particularly eagle-eyed is that I did have some errors and warnings before. So if I go, I did have some errors and warnings before in the previous view that I had. What we've done this year is actually try and shift more of the errors and warnings sort of out of when you create a file into this data screen here. So we know there were particular errors that came up at the point of create. I know one that came up a few times was when your HMRC ID was missing. We've got an error check for that, which is now actually at this part of the system. So that will pop up before you click create, and hopefully that will be a much better experience for you guys. I'm just going to pull some data in. So data's now in. So if I go back, I can see here's my organizations, my people, etc. I can see I've got errors and warnings, and I'll come on to those in a second. So errors, here I've got one error, just simply missing a country as part of an address. If you're not already aware, you don't necessarily have to navigate back into the data screen to get to what you need to amend. You can simply use the edit icon here, which will jump right to the piece of data which needs correcting. So in this case, I know I need to amend an address. I know from previous work that this was a Jersey address. And I used just typing in JE on the keyboard there to jump down the list as well, which is also something which can help save a bit of time. If you remember me talking about prioritizing countries earlier, I haven't prioritized any, but if I did prioritize some, then they would be jumping to the top of the list here. So you can see it's got Afghanistan on the top, but if I wanted to have some specific prioritized countries, this is where they would start to show up. So I would just save that data. That fixes my error. Amongst the warnings, you might be familiar with the warning I've got on screen here from last year. So where a tin is missing, then Alphacat will insert a default tin of 9 zeros or 9 A's, depending on which jurisdiction you're submitting to. From this year, we're expecting the IRS and HMRC to look in a bit more detail at when there are missing tins, and it's more likely to lead to them asking questions about why tins are missing. You may or may not be aware that there are some codes that you can put in rather than the 9 zeros. So HMRC have a good bit of guidance on this, and we've got a link to this particular page in our release notes. But within here, you've got codes such as 9 2s, 9 3s, 9 4s, and these are designed to communicate particular reasons why a tin is missing. So explanations are on screen. I won't go into them in too much detail now, but if you do want to utilize any of those codes to insert them into your data, then simply manually type them into the sheet. So if you want to put in 9 2s as the tin, rather than leave the data sheet blank, simply type in 9 2s. That will be accepted by Alphacat, and that will be inserted into your XML report. and that will in turn then get communicated to the tax authorities. That's what those codes are intended for, to work as a communication tool. For the sake of this example, I'm just going to leave that blank and accept the 9 zeros for now, which is also acceptable. You can still submit a report with 9 zeros in, at least for the Model 1 jurisdictions. So if I move on to creating a report, I've just got the one RFI. If you have multiple RFIs in one group, then you will see sort of multiple options popping up on this list. For the sake of this demo, I'm just creating one. Let's delve into that one. From here as well, I'd also start to point out that, picking up on something I just mentioned, that if you are dealing with multiple RFIs and you want to combine multiple RFIs into one XML, then that's where the combine function comes into practice here. So if I had just created reports for more than one RFI, I would see one per row on here. Once I get these reports to a status where they're marked as ready, they can appear under ready for submission. If I were to right click on or select all of the reports and that I want to combine, right click, the combine feature would then become available. I've only got one here in this particular example, but if I had multiple, it would give me the opportunity to combine. What that will then lead to is you're simply just working with one combined set of RFI reports, which will come out as one XML, which can lead to just a much more efficient way of submitting your report if you are submitting one for multiple RFIs, rather than having to say submit one report for each RFI. Just something to be aware of if you're using the combined option. It won't work for everything, so you can't combine reports to multiple different jurisdictions. It's just reports, say, to HMRC or just reports to Jersey. You can't combine across jurisdictions. And most, if not all, jurisdictions won't allow you to combine nil returns at the moment. So I believe that's due to change, but many jurisdictions don't accept combined nil returns. You still have to submit one XML at a time for a nil return at the moment. I shall just delve into this one computation for now. A couple of quick hints on here. I always find this accounts count at the top a very useful, just quick check, a quick sense check of has the report got as much as I would expect it to have. And if you haven't seen from previous years amongst the summary, then it does talk about some of the data which has been automatically inserted by Alphacat towards the top. Moving on to one of our enhancements. Within Excel, we produce, sorry, I jumped a bit too quickly there. Within this pane, we allow you to produce analysis of the contents of the report in a human readable format. Excel is a popular option which people use and we tend to recommend. That gives you detail as we see on screen here, basically laying out everything that's included in the XML, but in a more easy to digest format. We've introduced this year, though, a summary page as well. So this will help you with the analysis of what's been included. So what this summary tab does is actually give you sort of a high level count of the content of your report per RFI. So how many unique account holders have I got? How many are individuals? How many are corporates? And then sort of what residencies are included in this report. So if you've got someone with multiple residencies, and how many of those individuals have you got? Here, because it's a FATCA report, I've just got a count of US residents, but if you're doing a CRS report, then you're going to see more lines just reflecting the different residencies and accounts of individuals or reportable accounts which do have multiple residencies within your report. So hopefully you guys will find that as a useful review function to help.
At this point, could we, there's a question just relating to this role. Let's just check that it covers the one. Could you just have a look at the Q&A, please? There's a relating to that. I think is relating to, you've just covered that report. And there's also one about the spreadsheet checker.
So on the combined report, you can get the combined XML file out. Yep, that's true. You should be able to get out a combined report in Excel as well now. So of the summary I see on screen, if you're doing a combined report, you should see a combined Excel output as well. Do have a look out for that this year. If you're not seeing that or not sure how to access it, then do get in contact with support and we can help provide a bit more guidance on that. For the spreadsheet checker, it's not something that validates last year's template. No, it's something which is specific to the new template that we're introducing. So both templates get validated at the point you import them into the software, but only the new template will be validated via the spreadsheet checker. In terms of content, so I've moved very fast through that, but hopefully you've been able to follow some, if not all, of what I've included. That's really the end of the process. After this, you're exporting your XML. Nothing really new there, except for what I say with CRS and a new schema. If you're the real attentive to detail ones of you out there might see that it previously referenced version 1.0 or now referenced version 2. Which is just automatically dealt with by the software. But that's it. That's sort of everything I wanted to run through content-wise. I think we've pushed right up to time, so apologies for that, but we have managed to cover off some of the questions. Before we close for the day, are there sort of any other questions? We'll give a second in case there's any other questions which anyone would like to ask. So please do pop those in the Q&A if there's anything you would like answered now. And while you're thinking about that or typing, I'd reiterate the point that if you don't want to ask a question now, or if you'd rather spend a bit more time on it, then our support team are available. So please do get in contact with them and we can spend a bit more time exploring any of the things I've covered today or any questions you have and can look at it more specific to your circumstances.